Genesis chapter 41, and we're looking at the life of Joseph and how every one of us have influence in people's lives, but it's not a matter of whether we have influence or not. It's a matter of what we do with the influence we have. And we looked at Joseph's life, and we looked at the dreams that he had that God revealed to him, and we saw that he had part of his influence and how God worked in his life came through the trials and tragedies and tests in his life. And that's what builds us all. We don't get strengthened in the good times. We're strengthened through the hard times. And allows us to be able to take on the next thing. And you need to understand that your trials and your problems are not meant for other people, because other people may not be able to handle them. If they could, God would give those things to them. And God giving you problems is not God punishing you every time. God giving you challenges is for you to run back to Him and rely upon Him and trust in Him. Why? Because there's people in your life that God wants you to have influence over, and He wants you to help. I'll give you an example. I knew somebody that was going through some serious, things that you would never wish upon other people, and they were going through these things, and they were getting discouraged by it, and they went to a pastor that I know really well, and they said to this pastor, they said, I don't know why God is doing this to me. I don't know why He's allowing these things to happen. I don't know why He would let these things come into my life. And the pastor said to that person, maybe they're not for you. And you have to think about that. Maybe the problems, though happening to you, aren't always for you. But perhaps they're happening to you because somebody else is watching you. Children, loved ones, friends, neighbors. And what are you going to do with those trials? Will you blame other people? Will you blame the mistakes of others and the sins of others as a way to justify that? Or will you allow that to be a lesson for others that you have influence over, to be a help and encouragement, to see somebody going through something and to make it through the other side by the grace of God? I don't know anybody that comes into church that doesn't have a problem at one time or another. Everybody does. We all do. We may not talk about them. We may not share them. And I don't think everything's meant to be shared or talked about. But there are some things that God allows into our lives that I have to accept that it has nothing to do with me. And it has everything to do with Him and my trust for Him and the others that are around me in my life, distantly or otherwise, to be able possibly to take encouragement from, to say, if they're going through that, well, maybe I can make it through mine. You ever realize that somebody has it harder than you somewhere? We say we know that, but it's hard to imagine that when we're going through it, because we're only stuck on ourselves. How God wants us to steward influence is to not to think of ourselves and get in the trap of our own mind, but think about how He may be doing this for the benefit of somebody else who's watching you go through it. And I'm not saying this is easy, but I am saying it's actual reality of what happens. And so Joseph we saw the test of persecution. Number 2, we saw the test of position that he had in his life. And then we saw number 3, the test of problems. But we come to today, and here's one of the biggest tests that we don't recognize and the test that we don't appreciate. And I would say the test that we fail most often if we're not careful is the test of prosperity. We are not prepared for things to go well in our lives to the extent that we forget about God as soon as we think we're on the other side of something else. And I'm not trying to preach here. I'm trying to be very practical and very applicable for our lives. You should be just as needy and just reliant upon God in the good times when He's prospering you as much as when He is allowing the temptations, the trials, and the testings to come into your way. And here's how you know the real character of yourself. It's easy to say, well, my character, I'm struggling with God when things are going bad and all this, but if you struggle with God whenever things are all going right, then it's not a God problem. It's a me problem. It's a character problem in me. Pride is the number one killer of of Bible-believing Christians, of people as a whole, because it is the total self-reliance upon ourselves, the shunning of everyone, including God, in our lives. Pride. You say, oh, I'm not proud about anything. I have nothing to be proud of. That's not the point. What we're talking about is thinking of yourself more than you're thinking of God. That's what pride is. I'm amazed how pride comes out. Pride comes out in so many different ways. As a Bible college teacher, I know some things even about students. They can be prideful in what they learn and what they know. They may know something, factual understanding of something, but they're prideful in that, and so they're not teachable sometimes. With preachers, a preacher who isn't studying on how to be a better preacher constantly, that's a dangerous place because they are being prideful, saying, I don't need to learn. We had the singles activity yesterday. Brother Paulie preached, and he did some things from a technical aspect for me, and probably some people would be transparent, but I was taking notes about certain things he did, just in how he articulated things, just how he handled things in an invitation type setting. I mean, it was one of the most beautiful things I saw last night, where at the end of the invitation, he had everybody go and say, I want you to find a guy with a guy, a lady with a lady, find somebody that you don't know, and share with them what God told you to do in that message, how God spoke to you. And the invitation was people talking to each other, and then all of a sudden you just saw people praying with each other that never spoke, all around. And we probably could have gone on for about 15, 20 minutes of that. And it was just going, and God was working in these young single adults' hearts, and you just saw them sharing their heart with each other, praying with each other, going in a corner and talking and sitting down or standing up, and you just saw everybody bowing their heads and just praying with each other. Beautiful. I'll say this, in a church setting, music ministry, we can be very prideful. I remember when we had Brother McCurry come in May for a song leading clinic. I had some people when I invited out, and somebody from another church said, well, I don't need to learn anything about song leading. I do it every Sunday. Pride. Instruments, musicians can be prideful. Here's how you know. I don't need any more lessons. I've taken all that. Pride. I'll say this on the music side. Pride. Lucifer was in charge of the music in heaven. And it was pride. We can get prideful about many things, and they come up in many different ways, and we don't even realize it sometimes. And a lot of times when it comes up, it's because things are going well. We start believing that we did things, that God wasn't involved in it. Look how smart I was. Look at a great deal I got. Look how I got him down on price to buy this car, or all these different things. We take so much credit for things that we had nothing to do with. And we come to Joseph here in Genesis chapter 41 and verse 38. Look at this with me. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? Pharaoh said that about Joseph. After he got him out of prison, after he put him in a position of prominence. Verse 39, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Now Joseph had God's hand divinely woven into his life. That's obvious. Joseph could not have gone directly from slavery in Potiphar's house to the palace of Egypt if it were not for God. God used the prison to bring Joseph into contact with a man whom God would use to set Joseph in a place of influence. And had he been released 2 years earlier, Joseph would have been promoted from the prison back to slavery. Everything happened in God's time. You say, why have I struggled for so long? Why have I not worked for so long? Why have I been unable to find a house for so long? Why have I been able to not be able to do this for so long? Well, maybe it's not about you, and it's about God's timing for you. See, everything when we have that attitude is about me and me and me, and we forget about God's working in this. God used the time of suffering to set the stage for the influence he planned for Joseph's life. God was working. Joseph couldn't have done this better. Joseph couldn't have planned it out any better. God had the greatest plan for Joseph's life at the exact right time. Letter A, he was blessed by God. Joseph was blessed by God. His whole life, Joseph's whole life, is a testimony of yielding to God's working and yielding to God's leading in his life. How is God working in yours? How are you yielding to his working in your life? Are you trying to push through, or are you trying to follow him through? I want to push. I'm a pusher. I'll push myself to the limits. I spent last week, we were so busy, I spent two different nights of 2.5 hours of sleep, just pushing. And I can push myself, but I can't push myself the way God can bring me along. When God brings me along, he gets me through, and he gives me the grace, and he gives me the peace, and he gives me the rest that I can never do for myself when I push on my own. You can do a lot when you push yourself, but I can't say pushing yourself is going to do a lot for you. You have to let God bring you along and help you along. And when he's ready to move you, you need to be ready to move. And when he's ready to sit you, you need to be ready to sit. And when he's ready for you to go, you need to be ready to go. When he's ready for you to stop, you need to listen and stop. Pharaoh recognized the presence of God in Joseph's life and even promoted Joseph in Egypt, but it wasn't Pharaoh that promoted him, it was God, because he was working even in Pharaoh's heart. In your notes there, I think Psalm 75 verse 5 is on there. It says, "Lift not up your horn on high." You know what that's modern day speak for? Don't toot your own horn. You ever notice that? Well, I'll just say it like this. I never had to jockey or position myself for a better job or a promotion, because I just wanted God to use me where I was at and be content therewith. Everything else that happened came by God's grace. If you have to be your own person to hype yourself up to other people, God's not in that. God's not doing that. It's you. And you're going to get your results. And I will say this, it may go well for a time, but don't be surprised and don't be upset whenever your results yield limits on the fruit that could be born out of it. But when God does it, his fruit abides. His working is eternal. Look at it said, "Lift not up your horn on high. Speak not with a stiff neck." That's pride. "For promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south. But God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another." You know, that means whenever God puts somebody down, he can put you down and not be a punishment. There's jobs that I'm thankful that God did not give me, because it would have required things that I was not prepared to give and sacrifices I was not prepared to make. And it would have put me in places of decisions where I did not want to have to decide certain things. I mean, what good does it do if I gain everything financially, gain everything positionally, gain everything corporately, and lose my family in the process? I know a lot of people that have put their career first and lost their family. What good does that do? We can get all the things we want. We can have all the prosperity financially. We can drive the nice car. We can have the mansion and the yacht like Elmer J. Fudd. We can have all those kind of things happen, and then we are most miserable. Shaquille O'Neal, basketball player, retired. He made hundreds of millions of dollars in his career. And I heard him say this about his life. He lived hundreds of millions of dollars. People loved him. People followed him. He's on every commercial, every advertisement for every product out there, everything going on. He had multiple affairs on his wife that he knew since college, had multiple children. And then he said, one day she had enough. She left me, took the kids, moved out, and I came home to an empty mansion. Had everything, took everything that came his way, but lost what mattered most. He says to this day, he's 50-some years old. He said to this day, it's the biggest regret in his life, because he comes home to an empty home. Be careful. You may get what you want at times, but you will not want what you get when you get it. Joseph didn't wasn't only blessed by God, but letter B, he shared his prosperity. People forget this part too. Why do we forget it? We are prideful. One, we've gone without for so long that, and we've been the one who's been receiving. We say, well, this is my time. This is get back. This is catch up. And we forget all about God. People rob God with their tithes and offerings. They get the job, they get the promotion, they get the pay increase. They don't honor God. The Bible says when we don't tithe, we rob him. Robbing isn't the same as stealing from God. Stealing is taking something secretly. Robbing is taking something by force. When somebody chooses not to tithe, they're basically saying, it's mine. I'm going to take this with my own might, my own power, for my own good. I don't know how many people I've seen. They've gotten checks from Social Security, got checks of income coming in. They've never given God what is due to him. And who do you think gave you those things in the first place? We just forget them. We rob him. Robbing God. Imagine that. Robbing somebody at knife point, at gunpoint, taking something by force. You say, well, we're not doing that to God. Well, Malachi says differently. It says, wherewith have we robbed God? With your tithes and offerings. This isn't about money. This is anything God brings. Increase should require sharing. There should be something that causes us to do something for somebody else. Why? Somebody else is in a position that you were in at one time that you are no longer in, and maybe you could be a help to somebody else. We have people in here that have no job, no income, and they go out of their way and sacrifice themselves to go and provide to other people. What a blessing that is. All I've known is what I see is, I'm not saying they're prospering in ways and financially, all that stuff, but I know this, they haven't missed anything. God's taken care of them along the way through other people, through circumstances, but it's all been by the hand of God. And here's what I'm most worried about. Maybe I'm struggling or suffering or going without because God knows if he gave me what I'm asking for, I wouldn't do right by him in the first place. And so he'll just hold it back because he knows me better than I know myself. God blesses us not so we can revel in our prosperity, not so we can return in kind to those who made us suffer, but that we might be a blessing to others. I've had people promise, oh, Pastor, pray for me because I do this and I'm going to be a blessing for others. I say, do it now. Give of yourself. I don't have anything to give. You have yourself. Some of the greatest abilities that people have is availability. One of the greatest abilities that people can give is flexibility, dependability. You don't have to have a lot of talent, but those abilities are the greatest abilities anyone can give. While suffering may be the sharpest test we face, prosperity is probably the most severe test we will ever face. Rather than stewarding their enlarged influence to return glory to God and kindness to others, people simply squander their prosperity on personal gratification. I'm going to buy all the things I never could get. I'm going to get all my kids all the things they couldn't have. Do you know when I was a kid, I didn't realize how poor we were until somebody told me we were poor? I didn't realize how broke we were until somebody said, you guys are broke. And most of the time, I didn't realize that until I was an adult. We just lived. Isn't it nice just to kind of keep things simple sometimes and not overthinking just, hey, we have this. Let's be thankful for this. God gave us this. Let's take care of this. Let's honor him and glorify him with this. He's not asking you to say, hey, I'm going to give you this and make sure you glorify me. He's saying, can you just glorify me where you're at today? Joseph used his influence to store provision for the famine God had revealed would come to him. Go to Genesis chapter 45 with me, please. See, God prepared Joseph for a time for a whole nation because the nation needed a person like Joseph. And Joseph knew that God was taking care of him, and so he was allowing God to work out his perfect plan for his life. People will forget the promises they make to God in their points of desperation. People will forget the goodness God faithfully showed them along the way. Joseph didn't do that. I mean, if you would think it'd be difficult to be sold by your brothers into slavery when you were helpless to stop them, consider what it would be like to meet the same brothers one day when you had the power to even the score. That's what Joseph was in. Look at verse 3 in chapter 45. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. Joseph was now in a prosperous place. He was given control over all the stuff, all the grain, and all the commodities that were kept in store for this time of famine in Egypt. And when his brothers had need, when his father had need, they came looking to be able to have something in their time of need. And Joseph saw the same people that left him for dead, but they didn't know it was Joseph. Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him, and Joseph chose not to reveal his identity immediately. With a grace that surpasses human ability, Joseph spoke with compassion to his brothers. Look at verse 5 in Genesis 45. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves. Can you imagine saying that to a family member that's hurt you? If you're not able to say that today, you may not be ready for God to help you and prosper you. I'm just warning you. You say, what's holding me back? It's not God. It's me. It's me. He says, now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. He said, don't be mad that you sold me off and left me for dead and told Dad that I was dead and lied to him. For God did send me before you to preserve life. You got family members that have hurt you, family members that are harmed you, family members that have done wrong by you, friends that have hurt you, friends that have harmed you, friends that have done wrong by you, and all these other people. And one day, it may come back where you're in a position where they need you, and you have a choice you're going to make. You could say, now I have you, now I'm going to even the score. You can say, you know what? God put me in a position where He allowed me to have influence in the lives of others that you never knew, our own children that never met their grandparents, our own children that haven't been around family, our own friends that nobody knows of. And he says, God did it all for good. That's a chain-breaking testimony from Joseph. Joseph could carry the hurt and the scars and the anger and the bitterness and blamed all of it on the past. And in this world, he would have been justified to do whatever he did with the people he met forward. He could have robbed Pharaoh. He could have robbed the country. He could have taken all of his good. He could have overthrew the country, perhaps. They said, you know what? I'm going to trust God. I'm going to honor him with where he has me, and I'm even going to forgive people. You notice they didn't ask for forgiveness. He chose to forgive them first. They were scared of the retribution. And what did he do? He just alleviated all their fears. Through Joseph's influence and leadership, nations were saved from famine. You know what I think about with my kids when I think about hurts that happened to me in my life? I want to save them from the hurt that I've had in my life, the hurt that has come into our lives at different times and different things, by not repeating that cycle. Have we done it perfectly? Absolutely not. But I pray to the Lord that we haven't done it permanently. That how God has been so good to us, that's been reflected more than the mistakes we've ever made. And there's been a lot of times I've gone to my kids and said, hey, I've blown it, forgive me. I've gone to my wife, I've blown it, forgive me. But I always made sure I went to God first before I went to somebody else. We miss so many times how often we need to ask God to forgive us. That's the humbling part. Somebody who's prideful won't go to God, and they definitely won't go to the other person. Through his faithful success, we learn how we too can pass the test that would destroy our influence. We learn through Joseph how to lengthen the reach of our own influence, what God did. Joseph changed the landscape, I don't think it's an understatement, of almost the whole world at that time. because he chose not to be bitter and not to be angry whenever God put him in a position where he could do something about it if he wanted to. He just chose to allow God, who put him in that position, to continue to allow him to expand that influence and restored his whole family's relationship. I believe God can restore families today. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying he does it, and he will.